Here, Susan, you ready to roll?
Absolutely.
All right. We should be going live now. And it looks like we are now there and we are now live. So for anybody who's watching with us, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dustin Cormier, and we have just had a little bit of a technology burp, but now we should be back to being good and being live. So welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you all. My name is Dustin Cormier, and this is another episode here on my channel, and I believe that this might get uploaded to Susan's channel as well. I'm Dustin Cormier, and I'm here with the very patient Suzan Smadi. Nice to have you here, Susan.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And namaskar, everybody. So, Susan, my friend, I'm really glad to have you here. Susan is a fellow Tropical Vedic astrologer. And you have decided to, I think we found each other just through being Tropical Vedic astrologers. We've been talking on email a little bit, and now I finally got you here to discuss the particular discussion that's going to be going on today. We are going to be talking about the prosperity of the houses. It's from chapter 11 of Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. You can find Suzan Smadi on her internet website, sacredconnections8.com. Now, are you still actively doing charts, Susan?
Yes.
Yes, you are?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm wondering, we had a little bit of a technology burp before we got started here. Gen X Jason says that you are loud and clear. If any of our audience wants to let us know if we are all good now and that everybody can hear Susan clearly, feel free to just let us know so that we know for sure that there's no more technology burp ups. But otherwise, I think we should be okay. So thank you, Susan. You've been patient and you're hanging in there with me. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I was just thinking, I kind of wonder if I can see the comments too, but it's too much for me to kind of try to do right now. So
do you have your phone on you?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. So what you want to do is you go on my channel, How to Rock Astrology. You go to, it's probably going to be like the first thing on there, I think. But you could just go to the live section and you should find our video. And then when you go on there, you should be able to see the live stream comments. Wonderful.
I got it.
So folks, me and Susan are here and we're live. So if anybody wants to make any questions, any comments, we'll be here with you. My friend Teresa says that we can hear her now. And I'm so glad for that. Gotta love technology. Now, just to give a little bit, to reiterate a little bit what we were discussing in our previous, before we had this little technology burp up, we were discussing that we are both Tropical Vedic astrologers. Now, you mentioned that you started with Western just like I did. You got the interest to go into Vedic. And then once you were steeped in the Vedic, most people who go into Vedic assume that you have to bring the signs back 23 degrees and that you have to be a sidereal astrologer. And then you found out that you don't need to do that. You can still be a tropical based Vedic astrologer. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah. So that journey was really tough on me because of my sun in Taurus tropically.
Right.
So I started off studying Western astrology, but I've always been into the occult. So, I mean, I was doing palmistry back when I was 11 years old.
Cool.
Yeah, so I've always been into this field. But then I kind of wanted to study astrology since I was like a little girl. I was dissuaded from that because it wasn't a profession, but now we know it is, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I studied Western astrology. I loved the asteroids, but it just didn't feel like enough for me. Like I felt like I was always searching, seeking. It wasn't clicking for me, right?
Cool.
It just didn't feel right for whatever reason. The thing is that I was always scared to go into Vedic astrology.
Right. Interesting.
I thought it was like doomsday prophecy sort of stuff. And I didn't want to do that,
Fatalistic, I think is the word. Yeah.
Fatalistic, right. And I didn't want to do that, not to myself, not to people, like my sun in Atmakarka, I want to inspire people. That's like my main goal,
Cool.
And so I
Oh,
don't
the
want
sun
to
is
go
your
back.
Atmakarika in
Yeah.
Taurus. Beautiful.
In Kritika, yeah.
Yeah. In Kritika, you said?
Yes.
Yes, I remember you telling me. Wonderful. Wow. So you've got your Atmakarika in Kritika. Beautiful.
So then I got courageous and I went into the Vedic astrology field since 2017. But then I was doing it sidereally. I think I kind of wanted to brainwash myself saying, yes, my sun is in Taurus. I can totally see that, but it's just not, it didn't work out. It didn't fit. And not only didn't it fit for me, but it didn't fit for my clients.
Do you mean Aries? Sorry, you said you were playing with...
My sun in Aries sidereally doesn't fit my life.
Gotcha.
My personality, nothing, right? The Gemini rising, the Lagna in Gemini did fit because I am very mercurial, right?
Right.
However, if you see the chart in my tropical chart, Vedic astrology wise, right? It's the final dispositor, Mercury is in the 12th house in Gemini.
Gotcha.
So yes, I'm going to be very mercurial,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Everything kind of like streamlines right into Mercury in the 12th house. So that's why I felt very mercurial always, right?
Cool.
And so that actually made sense to me. So I said, okay, so now I can see how that makes sense. And I don't really have to have my Lagna in Gemini.
Right. But just the like classic confusion of someone who, feels one thing in their sidereal chart and then they go into tropical, and there's always things that can convince you both ways. I experienced that for sure.
Because if you're open to suggestions from people and you're open to people's opinions and if they're really sure and you feel they're really sure, then how could you say otherwise, right?
Totally.
It's only after a lot of practice and experience that you get to see, hey, this is not working, not for me. If it is for you, great. It doesn't
Beautiful.
work. Right?
So would you say that, I'm finding as a tropical Vedic astrologer that one of the only ways that I could get to be where I am is that I went through both. My story is the exact same as yours. I started in Western, and then I thought, because I'm a yoga person, I love all things Indian. I love all things Vedic. I'm obsessed with like the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, like all these old Vedic texts. So it was very natural for me to go towards Vedic astrology. And when I found out that all my signs were different, I was really bummed out about it and I wasn't sure about it. But then as I got into it, I feel like a very Venusian person. And I felt like my sun is in Libra in sidereal, and I arrived with that. I learned eventually that as a tropical person, I'm a Venus Atmakarika. So it's the same kind of classic story. Now, would you say you were well served to, it's like, this is one of those things that you can only explore both in and then just use your intuition and feel out where it takes you?
Well, here's the thing. When I tried to use the techniques on the charts that I was reading, it just didn't work. It didn't work. So I had to go into my psychicness, right? And just read the chart from that stance as opposed to reading it scientifically, which is why I got into astrology in the first place.
Right.
So the only thing is that the sidereal nakshatras actually worked.
Right.
So if I focused just on the nakshatras, then I could actually do a reading with just that, but I couldn't mix the rashis with them. If that
classic. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. And, one of these days I'd love to get you on to talk about nakshatras because there's a whole world there and I'm getting into it in my channel.
And you know what? The thing is, we're just stepping our toe in the water.
Totally.
We're just out of the Kali Yuga,
Totally.
So all of that information has been lost in time. And we're just getting it back and we're testing the waters. And that's really why the confusion anyway. Yeah,
I would say that makes sense to me too. And this is why we're talking about it in today's time. So when you got into, so you're a Vedic astrologer. And there's many different forms of Vedic astrology. It's got lots of depth. I learned everything I got from Asheville Vedic Astrology. That's Ryan Kirksack's course. And he goes through various different texts. The big one when it comes to the signs is the Yavana Jataka. And a very important text that Ryan sticks to in his course is Parashara. It's the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, which is basically this book right here, if anybody's ever seen it before.
I have the other rendition, the one with the golden and the silver.
Cool. So I guess that must be a different author too then. Now I'm going to be coming on my page soon, talking about an article that Ernst Wilhelm wrote about how Parashara is great, but it has a lot of corruption. It's something that many of the things in Vedic astrology, really all astrology, has this, having to deal with how astrology was treated in history, the medieval ages, the Christian whole dark age spiel of going and doing book burnings of these bad, evil people who are practicing this satanic religion of astrology. As time has gone through, opinions have changed about all that, but there was a lot of corruption, a lot of erosion of knowledge, and a lot of things lost, a lot of things hidden. So if you don't mind my asking, when you got your Vedic knowledge, including the knowledge that you have of Parashara, did you have any kind of lineage that you abided by, any kind of teacher that you stick to?
So because I'm very mercurial, I was taking in information everywhere. However I could get it. I just started reading tons of books. I started studying with Mark Boney, and that
Cool.
like back in 2017 or 2018, I can't remember, probably 2018. But then I went to the Vedic Astrology conference and I got, hooked up with a whole bunch of people there.
Dope.
Yeah, but then I was doing sidereal astrology, right?
Yeah.
So now since I've changed, I feel like I'm not part of the group anymore,
I understand.
So
welcome to our side.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's part of the journey. It's part of everyone's journey to kind of follow our own inspiration, follow our own path, and not worry about anyone else's. And I think that's what Aquarius is all about, right? Being the individual within the whole.
Right. I often, there's an old astrology poem from the Western tradition. It was made in the 70s. It's a cool audio. It's an album with a stream of poetry throughout. One of the lines they attribute to Aquarius is they say, "In the opal light of Aquarius, all men can blend and still be what they are." And I should say, they use the word men, but it's really all people.
Yeah.
All people can blend and still remain what they are.
Yeah. The word man, right? I believe comes from the word manas, right? Which means right?
Totally. I'm with you on that.
And we're in the species of human,
Right. Of the mind.
Right. Of the mind. We're actually in the process of developing and mastering our minds. We're not there yet,
Totally. So, very cool. And I think even the chakras of the human body, being this physical thing, are really just a development on the nature of the mind that humanity expresses. Or a certain level of evolutionary grip on the miraculous nature of consciousness, which is inside of all beings. And for us, it's developed to a certain point, for better or worse, because there's a lot of animals that are probably happier and more balanced than we are. But that's just the nature of what we've got to do when consciousness is in its teenagehood, represented by humanity, in my opinion. Cool. Okay, Susan, wonderful. So thanks for sharing a little bit of that background. I think that really, I think I could talk with you for hours about tropical Vedic astrology, about what it means and going through to it. And even being in a community, ultimately, as we kind of talked about this beforehand, when it comes to different types of astrology, we're all like five blind men trying to describe the same elephant.
Absolutely.
One person's touching this part. It's like, oh, it's leathery and it's hard. But then person's like, no, it's got these big white tusk-like things. Different versions of the same truth. And so I think that's a good way to sort of talk about Vedic astrology in that sense. Really all astrology.
Yeah,
different lenses on the same truth.
We have to understand that there are tons of ways to look at the stars and derive meaning from it. But guess what? We're the consciousness, we're the self-consciousness that's deriving meaning from all the meaningless things,
Beautiful. Totally.
And you know that because you're a Venus Atmakarka, right?
You got it.
Right.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to go back to answering the question. So even though I started with Mark Boney and read all these books, my lineage really is Ernst Wilhelm stuff. Like I studied that profoundly, and I kind of had to be open to kind of like tell my mind, forget everything you've learned, forget everything that is in here, and empty it out. And now this is the thing to study.
Right.
And that's the process I had to take.
I completely understand. I experienced that same thing with even some of the stuff that we're going to get into today.
Yeah.
Like Rashi aspects is a good example of something where me as like a Western trained astrologer, I was like, man, I don't know if this is for me because this is so different from what I'm used to. But I had to kind of like just let go of what I thought I knew and open myself to what was right in front of me. And that was a difficult thing, but it's one of the reasons why I am where I am today. I'm glad that you brought that up.
It's evolution. That's what that is.
Totally. Wow. What a great way to put it. You can't evolve unless you're getting out of the state that you were in before.
We have to get out of the box of our belief system. We all
Beautiful.
do, right?
Great, Susan. Awesome. I really love talking with you about this. So Ernst was who you would say is the sort of the bones of what you would call your tropical Vedic lineage of knowledge?
Yes.
Groovy. And that's wonderful. Ernst Wilhelm is a hero to me, let alone a teacher. And I do a lot of work with Ernst. So he is a very common ground for a lot of us tropical Vedic astrologers.
Well, I think he had the courage to come out in public. He was well known in scholarly field, right? In the academia of astrology, of Vedic astrology. And he had to have the courage to come out and say, this, I've been playing around with this, and this is what's actually working.
Right.
And come what may.
Yeah. Yeah. He just went with what seems to actually be working.
Right.
And, that takes a bit of courage on his part for sure. So cheers to Ernst. God bless him. So now when it comes to your knowledge of Parashara, you must know the difference between Parashara and Jaimini.
Yes. And I actually I like both. You really should do both. Right. But I think that for the psychology, I focus more on the Parashara system. Yeah. And then for the actual prediction, what's going to happen. Yeah. It's more the Jaimini stuff. There's nothing like it because it's on off. It's just like the human design. It's a binary system on off. Totally.
Right. And yeah, that makes sense to me. Jaimini, I would say, is really like, I'm going to go through this little presentation I've got, at least for the beginning of it, talking about how Jaimini is kind of the Aristotle to Parashara's Plato. That's at least how I kind of think of it. Would you say that makes sense to you? Not necessarily to say that Plato, because I love Plato more than Aristotle, but metaphorically speaking, Aristotle kind of jumped off of what Parashara had laid down. Jaimini kind of jumped off what Parashara had laid down.
So I don't know if that's true. So I can't say with any kind of authority that who came first.
Cool.
And if I can't say that, I'm going to stay back,
Beautiful.
But with that, I love what you said, Plato and Aristotle. The thing is, you said you liked Plato more. I said I like Aristotle more. I have such a I have such a connection with Aristotle.
Beautiful.
For reason.
Cool. Cool. Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's really one of those things where you got to really appreciate both.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think about. I'm sure you and I could go off on that as well. But sticking to our conversation today, what we can say is that there's conjecture regarding whether these two were contemporaries, or whether Parashara taught Jaimini, or whether Jaimini, like, it's really hard to say, who's the chicken and who's the egg on that one. But I have heard it go as Parashara being the sort of patriarch.
Yes.
And then Jaimini was someone who refined what Parashara had laid down. Mm-hmm. The audience, you're right to say that we should keep in mind that it's not confirmed by any historian in any reasonable way. But that being said, Parashara's works, while there's much corruption in it, and there's much that has come to us through the distortions of history, the distortions of commentators who take the text and say, this is what I think Parashara is saying. But those people there's a lot of half-baked stuff in a lot of these commentaries that we hear coming down. So when it comes to what is in Parashara, Ernst Wilhelm has a great article online about refining your how much you should take for granted in Parashara. It's a nice detailed article that I'm going to talk about on my channel soon. So with that being said, Parashara is generally conveyed as being the one who lays down a lot of the basic stuff that we read as Vedic astrologers. This includes like how to kind of deal with the houses and the house cusps. Really, there's like probably, I think, like 80 chapters or more in Parashara's work. And it lays a lot of these foundations down.
It gives the main bones, the main rules. It gives the calculations, but it doesn't really teach you how to be an astrologer by any means.
Right, definitely. And that's really a whole world in itself. Right. Now, that being said, I think that there is a lot of stuff in Parashara that I think is those bones we can take and see what the bones are and learn to interpret astrology based on those given bones in ways that are really like there's a rishi consciousness there. There's really somebody who's really got an expertise on astrology that is from another world almost. Now, today's discussion, we're going to be going through one particular chapter of Parashara. And, Suzan, like, I just love hanging out with you and talking about this stuff. And really, there's so much more we can go through. But we decided today that we would pick one. Now, what do you think that we start moving through a little bit of this presentation that I have?
Go for it.
All right, Suzan, that sounds good to me too. So let's start moving.
I have to say, it's a really good and thought out and very professional presentation. So
bless you.
That you're bringing it up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now, since you're here with me, I figure we're going to do a lot of bouncing and just rapping. But for anybody who's interested, this presentation in its full thing, fully expounded, you can find it on Ryan Kirksack's astrology channel. I did this as an essay for Asheville Vedic Astrology. And so this is kind of just, again, more bones for us to sort of pick through. This is the prosperity of the houses as coming mainly from chapter 11 of Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. And I should say, if we have time, and I think we should, I think eventually we're going to be discussing what this looks like in the chart of Robin Williams. You had the idea to discuss that. So let's see if we can bounce through this enough so that we have time to go through that. Now, this is a little bit of background on what we just sort of talked about. Now, we're kind of talking about the difference between Parashara and Jaimini. Chapters 8 and 11 represent deep roots that are used in both the Parashara and Jaimini systems of astrology. Chapter 8 in particular talks about Rashi aspects, and we can see it as the sort of Rashi aspects here. If there's a planet in a cardinal sign, it's going to affect all the fixed signs except for the one neighboring it. And then we can see a planet in Aries is Rashi aspecting these signs. A planet in Cancer is Rashi aspecting Taurus, Aquarius, and Scorpio, but not Leo. So that's an example of Rashi aspects. And Jaimini is really big on these Rashi aspects. Parashara gives these in chapter 8 of his work. And he also talks about some important stuff in chapter 11 that is kind of based on these Rashi aspects. So this is what we say, is that we don't know if they were successors or contemporaries to each other, but Jaimini took what Parashara did and expanded on it in his own very specific way of doing astrology. So this Jaimini stuff is also talked about in chapters 29 through 33 of Parashara. But what Ernst has told us is that anything with regard to Jaimini that is given in Parashara's work, you should just get it straight from Jaimini. That's an important thing that I haven't put in this essay. For example, chapters 29 through 33 of Parashara, you should just look to Jaimini's actual work, because a lot of the stuff in Parashara that is supposed to talk about Jaimini is supposed to be corrupt in Parashara's thing. It's the nature of what we're doing in today's time, is gleaning the cream from the runny milk of what has been given in old texts. Trying to find what's authoritative and what's not is very much what guys like Ernst Wilhelm are doing these days. Now, ultimately, between these two, a good Vedic astrologer should understand them as being different and should work to marry them both. As Suzan already poignantly said, Parashara is good for almost like a Jungian perspective on the psychology of a person. And Jaimini is very good at looking at what can be practically predicted based on what's given in a person's chart. So this is kind of saying more of what me and Suzan have talked about. Essentially, Parashara is some real important basics, and Jaimini took after what was given in Parashara. Now, you should keep your apples apples and keep your oranges oranges. You should understand Parashara and Jaimini to be different, and then try to kind of use them both. Now, what this is, I'm going to kind of expedite a lot of what these pages are saying. But essentially, what this is saying is that there's an ontological sequence that's given in all sutras, whether it's Patanjali's Yoga Sutras or whether it's the Indian astrology texts, where they give the really important stuff first. And then later on in the text, you'll find stuff that are typically regarded as less important. They say the important stuff first, and then everything else is talking about that important stuff. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because chapter 8 and 11 are given, they're pretty, how shall I say it? They're early in the text. So this special chapter 11, the judgment of the houses, is very early in the sequence. We can see that this is sort of a breakdown of a lot of the chapters in Parashara's work. Chapter 8 and chapter 11, which are kind of these important things that we're talking about in today's lesson, are very early in the text, even earlier than a lot of the effects of the houses, the effects of the Bhava lords, the 144 different combinations of, the first lord in the second house, first lord in the third house. The Bhava yogas is what I'm thinking of. What we're talking about today comes even before the Bhava yogas. And maybe we'll just scratch this out a little bit. So let me ask you, Suzan, do you find yourself using the Bhava yogas a lot in your astrology practice?
So here's the thing. No two charts I'm going to read ever the same way.
Cool. Great answer.
No two people are exactly the same. So why would I read the same thing? No. What I do is I take in the information, like I said, mercurial, right? I'm
Right.
taking all the facts, right? I'm computing it in my brain, and then I'm letting the art piece, the right brain kind of take over.
Cool.
So that's why, like, I'm going to tell you a story about when I studied with Mark Boney. There was this one time that he was, and this is like very basic stuff. He was
Cool.
explaining a chart of someone in the political arena. I can't remember who it was. And then all I said was, he asked a question and I said, I have a feeling that it's something political, that they're going to be high in politically.
Cool.
And he stopped me and he asked me, are you getting that from the chart or are you getting that psychically? And so that made me kind of shut down, because he knows my secret, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Cool.
I can't answer the question, right? I have a feeling I got it from the chart, perhaps from a different lifetime. I've studied astrology.
Cool.
Right? So I just felt very, very exposed, so I never said anything again in the class.
Yeah, I mean, he's being a teacher and he's trying to make sure that that everyone is aware of their own bias when it comes to their way of conceiving the objective knowledge. And I guess that's why it's tough getting pointed out in a class. But so what was your experience with that? Did you find
so that was early on, and to me, I'm getting the information when I'm looking at a chart. It kind of like opens the door to see things, whatever I have to see,
Gotcha.
And in reality, in actuality, it's God's grace. What I'm seeing is the divine, and
Beautiful.
I'm seeing the divine unfold in front of me. So to me, that's sacred. I don't touch it, right?
Beautiful.
But I'm trying to kind of like cut it into pieces as a scientist, right?
Right.
And dissect it and understand how the pieces work together, But when I'm reading a chart, I'm just letting it talk to me.
Cool. Beautiful. And I can relate to that. I would almost say, Susan, that, I really try to take, there's like for me, a left brain and a right brain approach to really everything.
Right.
And I think that what I tend to do when I'm beginning to read somebody's astrology chart is I have a standard operational initiatory procedure where basically what I do is I'll write the circle. I'll draw a circle. I'll draw their rising sign. I'll split the circle into 12 pieces. And then I'll put all the planets in the signs. That starts me getting to know where the planets are in the signs. And what I'll start doing is I'll write out the Shadbala. I'll just literally write it down in the order that's given in Shadbala. And one of the earliest things that I do in this initiatory procedure, already as I'm going through this, I'm starting to intuit like, oh, this person's got Saturn conjunct Mars in Aries. Like I'm going to be talking about that at some point. So that's like me starting the intuitive process. But even before I start, I'm not going to abandon my initial procedure right away to just start talking about that Mars and Saturn, because there are ways that I want to quantify the whole chart and all the planets in the chart before I start using that intuition. So for me, one of the earliest things that I do is to go into the Avashtas, as well as eventually the prosperity of the houses, as in this chapter that we're doing, is something I do. Really, I dig deeply into the prosperity of the houses of planets that I deem important.
That's wonderful.
Right? Thank you. And I appreciate you saying that. I'll look usually at the prosperity of the Rahu sign, as well as the Ketu sign. I'll look at the prosperity of the signs that the Atmakaraka rules. I'll usually look at the prosperity of the house of the Lagna. And so, and then I'll usually use what we're giving in this sort of little lesson is this prosperity of the houses of those planets. So with regards to what you are talking about in regards to having your intuition, but also probably having bare bones procedure.
Yes, but the techniques that I use, I'm letting God kind of like put me to which technique to use in the chart. You know what I'm saying?
Gotcha. Cool.
So like a lot of times I'm using the yogas as the start, like the character yogas, you know, the Namash yogas.
Okay. Yep.
I'll start with that first to see the character of the person. Other
Cool.
times, other clients come in and I'm just focusing on the Jaimini stuff. So
Cool.
I'm just focusing on the focal bhavas. You know what I'm saying?
Beautiful.
Because I have to focus also on the reason why they're here.
Yeah.
I want to get to the root cause as quickly as possible.
Totally. And I guess even really like if they send you a certain question or the way that they write, the way they say, hey there, you know, I'm this person, I've got this going on. And even if they just tell you, I just want a general look at my chart, you can see in the spirit of the email that you get presented first that, okay, this person's looking for me to do something predictive for them. And so you might want to lean towards Jaimini. Jaimini. I always say Jaimini, but I know it's Jaimini.
It doesn't matter how you say it, as long as you know what you're talking about, you know?
Bingo. Apples are apples.
Yeah.
Cool.
You know what it is? I think that we attract what we are. And a lot of times I see myself attracting like probably more cerebral and skeptics.
Cool.
And then when they come to me, they probably have no expectation.
Right.
You know, and they come out really glad that they came.
Right.
They don't really, you know, they probably never had an astrology reading before. Some people that come, they're surprised because
cool.
no two astrologers are going to do the same reading.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Beautiful.
You know?
Totally. So, you know, something I'd even like to ask you is, do you find yourself quantifying planets, even if you're going to be giving them a Jaimini reading? Like, for example, you'll look at someone's chart, and if you eyeball and right away you can see that someone's got, what is it? There's a very important yoga that happens when basically you've got a benefic in the 2nd or the 11th or the 9th from the Atmakaraka. Shrimantaha, I think is what I'm thinking of. So you'll see like Shrimantaha, which is a Jaimini technique showing that a person could get, you know, important connections to wealth or to fame, or that the person's going to be an important person. Even when you get something like this, any kind of Jaimini vision that you see, do you find yourself, no matter what, leaning on a basic quantification of planets as given in either Parashara or any other text?
That's a hard question.
Cool.
Because I think that there are so many different things that you can look at to judge whether a planet's going to give its effects or how good it's going to give it its effects.
Agreed.
Or how strong it is to give the effects, you know? So
totally.
There are different avashtas. There are 5 different avashtas, right?
Right.
So if you want to look at the whole picture, you have to look at all the avashtas.
Totally.
They might be contradicting each other. So you have to be prepared for that too.
Yeah, they usually will.
I think that what I like to say that about astrologers, it's like you're an accountant and an artist at the same time.
Right.
You know, you have to compute in your brain all these
Very
things
good.
very quickly, right? But then you have to let the intuition guide you as to which is really more important than not.
Right. Because you could just, if you're an accountant, you could just come in and be like, all right, we have 100 things to go through. We're just going to start alphabetically. You could get to D and never talk about the important accounting that this person actually came to you for. You got to be able to let go of the alphabetical thing and just ask, okay, what can I do for you in order to be the best accountant that I could possibly be for you? What do I have to skip in order to get to the heart of the matter? Which is why intuition. Yeah, that intuition is very important. Yeah. Okay, very good, Susan.
Plus, we have to remember that the grahas are doing different things all at once. You know, they rule so many different things, you know. So we kind of like have to let the intuition guide us for that too.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Absolutely. So, yeah, and a lot of the times, like, do you find yourself listening to your own grahas, or are you listening to the grahas of the person, or do you find there's a fusion happening?
I feel there's a fusion.
Right. It's
Right.
like someone coming to you and they are Saturn at Makaraka. You have your sun at Makaraka. You're going to have to be that for that person. And they are going to have to be what they are towards you. And it's just like any relationship, that fusion is going to be a thing. But that being said, in yoga, one of the phrases that I hear all the time is that you got to teach what's within to who's in front.
Right.
You got
And a
to,
lot of times, I find that everything that I'm telling someone, I actually have to hear myself.
right.
So I'm actually teaching what I have to learn too.
Cool.
You know?
Wonderful. Yes. Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about astrology. It's like astrology is just basically these universal limbs of consciousness. We're talking about consciousness, and whenever you illuminate something to somebody, most of the time, if you're illuminating to someone about the sun, about any archetype of the human unconscious, you're bound to be ringing in your head that, I'm glad that I am learning the words that I'm speaking. It's a fascinating thing. That's just the nature of astrology.
I find it to be extremely humbling.
Great way to put it. Wonderful way to put it, Susan.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about Parashara today, I think that it would be in good practice for us to focus on what we can get out of this Parashara-based lesson.
Right.
And I am really glad that we gave this a context, because everybody in my audience is learning this as I bring people on and as they see the depth of Vedic astrology. We have to understand that we could go into a class that is specific to only one particular lens, and we will only be getting, Vedic astrology in general is a color by numbers picture. You can come to an astrologer 5 different times and they'll give you 5 different lenses of the same color, 5 different colorations of the same picture. So when it comes to a class like this, it will be good to have the context that it's in. And ultimately, for now, I'm going to try to focus particularly on Parashara as we move through this. So I've found, and this is one of the reasons I'm getting to where I'm going with all this, is that when I am looking through the Parashara lens, I think this lesson that we're going through here today is one of the primary things that I do before quantifying other things in the chart. And this is kind of why I'm coming to this particular point. If I'm going to be looking through, there's, the effects of the houses, and then there's also the effects of the Bhava lords, the Bhava yogas. Ernst Wilhelm has talked about how the sutras on the Bhava yogas, and this is the 144 different combinations of the lords in the houses. This is regarded as being one of the great unique contributions of Parashara. It's written in a sutra form that can be expanded on and is very complete. But it always needs to be quantified. And this is one of the reasons why I did this essay, is because I find a lot of people, they get into astrology, into Vedic astrology, they get into Parashara, once they catch on to the 144 yogas, they go, oh my God, this is a world that everybody needs to get into because there's so much there. And it's very conducive to Western astrologers. That's why I am going to start talking about it on my chart, just to pull in Western astrologers, because it's very bare bones. Now, just to give it short thrift here, when we talk about the 144 Bhava yogas, we are looking at Robin Williams's chart here. We're going to be going through this throughout this, conversation. But just to give people an idea of what we're talking about, We see Robin Williams is a Scorpio rising, according to what Ernst Wilhelm has given in his database on Kala. So for a Scorpio, we know Mars rules the first house. When we look at Mars in the chart of Robin Williams, we see that Mars is in the sign of Cancer. Now, somebody has already asked us about the house system that we use. Now, I use basically a whole sign house system, and the house cusps fall into the whole sign houses almost as if they're their own planet. Now, for example, we have Mars in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is naturally the ninth sign from Scorpio. As well, the ninth house cusp falls in Cancer in this chart. So there's sort of a double resonance of ninth house happening in Robin Williams' chart. So we have the first lord of Scorpio falling into the ninth house. Now, it is debilitated, which shows a little bit of negativity there, but there's so many things we would need to do to quantify that Mars. Now, we're going to get there eventually, but for now, this is what we mean when we talk about the 144 Bhava yogas. The first lord can fall into any of the 12 houses. The second lord can fall into any of the 12 houses. And all of these would mean different things for what that planet is doing for a Scorpio rising, being in that sign. Now, this is a very popular technique, and I always recommend people consider that just because the Mars is in Cancer and it's debilitated doesn't mean we should throw it away as being a negative first lord in the ninth house. And this is kind of what we're getting into in this discussion, really. Parashara's 11th chapter, the prosperity of the houses, is a way of quantifying what we see in a Bhava yoga, like the first lord in the ninth house.
Okay.
Is this making sense to you, Susan?
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful. And this quantification is very important whenever we see anything in astrology. We see a generalized rule, like the cookbook thing. Everybody loves to do the cookbook thing. Venus and Taurus, it's in its own sign. It's got to be good.
I can't stand that.
So this is why it's important for us, because I mean, heck, like I go on and I talk about on my own channel, Venus and Taurus is in its own sign, that it has good qualities, but this is only in the context of the planet in its sign.
Right.
There's so much more going on with each planet than just the planet in its sign. Right. There's Digbala, there's Shadbala, there's these Avashtas, there's the prosperity of the house. And so this is one of the reasons why we're here talking about it today.
And I wanted to mention that to judge the yogas, there's a formula that I personally use, the formula that's in Kala, right? So cool. You have these numbers, the total Shubha, the total
right.
Ishta, Kashta, so all of that has to be multiplied, and then you have a final number. So that's the number that I tend to look at most when I'm trying to quantify the different yogas for the 144, the named yogas, all these types of yogas. I look at these numbers to quantify.
Okay. I know the one you're talking about, Susan, and I'm glad to hear you mention it. This is this was the cream of the crop technique in my training with Ryan. So let's see if I can just get a look at it here. This would be Ishta Sabha. So when we look at, if I think I'm reading it correctly here, what we look at is the calculation called Ishta times Sabha times, this SD essentially means Digbala.
It's the Shubha Digbala, Ashubha Digbala.
Right. So when we look at the Ishta, the Sabha, and the Shubha Digbala, we get an overall picture of either a green number and then a red number. And this is a certain important ratio that really, again, Susan, you and me could just do a whole class on this. There's so much to astrology that we could rap about. But I am glad you brought this one up. So when we look in Robin Williams' chart, for example, we can see that he's got a very good ratio in his sun. He's got good Ishta. His Sabha is not the strongest when it comes to the sun. But what we're doing is we're multiplying the points of the total Ishta the points of the total subba, and the points of the Digbala. The sun in particular is probably very close to the 10th house cusp. And so it's got a very strong Digbala. When you take all these points and multiply them together in terms of the ratios given, what we get is a score of about 8 on the positive yoga multiplier and a 0.6 on the negative yoga multiplier. And this generally tends to mean that the good qualities of that sun are expressed in a strong way, and the negative qualities of that sun are not expressed all that strongly. And this is a good sign for the sun of Robin Williams.
Yeah, and also it's actually about any yoga that's talking about anything negative, it's only going to be able to give that negative amount.
Right.
So not much for the sun, right?
Say it again.
So not much for the sun.
Right.
Looking at the sun. So the sun doesn't have much to give for the negative, any negative yoga that it's making.
Right.
But it does have a lot to give for any positive yoga. Right?
Beautiful.
Right.
Totally, Susan. And this is very important because a lot of people, when they read the report given in Kala, for example, you could read about all the yogas that the sun is involved with. And it looks daunting and it can be terrible because the sun is, it's conjunct Mars in this chart. It's at a certain angle from the moon, whatever it might be, or Rahu even. And whatever's happening there can seem very daunting, but quantifying in the way that we are clarifies what is given as a generality, because astrology is full of generalities that we just have to quantify. If you just stick to what's given as the generalities, you're basically looking at the map, but you're not seeing the territory for what it is. Would you say that that's a pretty kind of a good way of putting that?
I like that way.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, Susan, and thank you for bringing up the Ista Subba Digbala there.
Yeah, I want to apologize if that's like too foreign or too much, too intense.
Well, no, I think it helped us get to our main point here, which is that we have to, in astrology, especially in Vedic astrology, we're given many generalizations through the yogas. Mm-hmm. And it's important to know that we have to quantify them and not take them all wholesale.
Right, because you could be telling someone you're going to be famous and you're going to be rich, you're going to be a billionaire, and that's not the case.
Right, exactly.
You have to take that also into consideration as to what you read in the chart to begin with.
Right.
If something is not promised in the chart in the Rashi, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen. Right?
That's right. Yeah, the Rashi being the D1, the birth chart itself.
Right, and then you have to look at the Kavadamsha, the D40, to kind of judge the extremes. So it's not just that simple to just look at one thing and say this is it,
Right, absolutely. And it's very important to consider this, because most times what is given as generalizations are even going to contradict each other. You're going to have, one yoga will say you're going to be famous and you're going to be well loved by women and men and you're going to have many children. And then you look at another yoga and it says the exact opposite. How can it be both? This is the quantification. The quantification is what is going to be the devil in the details when we're looking at these yogas and such things. There's so much to astrology, but that's because there's so much to human consciousness. We wouldn't want it to be any other way.
And human consciousness, the human mind is so complex.
Totally.
And we get in our own way, we are like our worst enemies in a lot of ways. So
Totally. Beautiful, Susan.
But I think this is a nice segue to get back to the Bhava Yoga, not the Bhava Yogas, the inauspicious and auspicious Bhavas. Right. The topic that we're talking about.
Yes, that's right. And so that the auspicious and auspicious bhavas from the Lagna, this is something that I talk about a lot on my channel. And it's something that really is very central to what we talk about as Vedic astrologers. The whole sign house system is something that is a very key understanding when it comes to unlocking what's given in Vedic astrology. And it's important, even how I regard it, we're talking about the prosperity of the houses. And as I understand it, I wonder if you can roll with me on this, Susan. I think that prosperity, as it is given in chapter 11, is something that can happen to an auspicious house as well as to an inauspicious house.
Absolutely.
Right? You can have the sixth lord having prosperity, and that usually means that the malefic associations of the sixth house are still going to be malefic. The sixth house is always going to give rather aggravating experiences, but it could be like someone who's mining and they've got a very sharp knife and they have to do more digging than everybody else, but they're going to get more gems out of that sixth house because if it's prosperous in the way that we're giving in this lesson. So let's start moving through this a little bit here, Susan. You want to continue on with where we're at in our lesson?
Absolutely.
All righty. And I should say to you, Susan, you and I, especially because we had a little bit of a technology burp at the start of this, I've got lots of time here. I'm enjoying talking with you. I could really do this forever. But with that being said, if you have any time constraints or anything like that, please feel free to let me know. You can let me know now if you have an idea of how long we want to go, or as we go along, if you want to say at any point, I'm thinking maybe we could go for another half an hour or whatever it is,
Okay, sounds good. I think we should play it by ear, maybe do half hour from now and see how we feel. We both
okay.
feel.
Yeah, sure. So my time, that would be around 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So how about we go for that? And around the time we get there, I'll mention that we had said that. And then from there, we can decide if we feel like it. We still got lots more to talk about. We can just keep going, or we can start rearing it in, wrapping it up kind of thing.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. We'll go by feel on it, my friend. And I thank you for your patience. I really am glad to have you here. So let's start digging.
You know what? It's an honor for me too.
Good. Sweet.
I love talking astrology with fellow astrologers. It's so fun for me.
Beautiful. And it's something that it's really good to do it with another person like this. It's brings it out in ways that just studying can't necessarily do. Mm-hmm. Although it's important to do both. Right. So let's dig a little bit here and see what else we've got going on. So the main point of all this is to show that, in my opinion, the judgment of the prosperity and annihilation of the house is something that I regard as something prior to what I can expect from the effects given from the Bhava yogas. For example, as we saw in Robin Williams' chart, the first lord is in the 9th house. We could read a little bit about that. We probably will at some point. I don't have my book on me, unfortunately, but we'll be able to find it.
Yeah, it's a yoga section.
Yes. In I see what you mean. You'd find it in Kala.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Susan.
No problem.
So Susan is saying that we can go to the 144 Bhava yogas and find it here. Mm-hmm. So we'd have the Lagna Lord abiding in the fortune house, which is the 9th house. One born will be fortunate, dear to people, a Vishnu devotee, an intense speaker, and joined with wife, children, and wealth. It's because the first lord is identifying with all things related to the 9th house. That's generally given as a lucky placement because anything generally tends to do well in the 9th house. But again, we have to quantify this Lagna Lord in the 9th house. Even though it's in the lucky sign of the 9th house, somebody gifted with $1 million isn't necessarily going to use that money well. This is kind of like a metaphor for what I'm saying, where just because you have any house, any planet in the 9th house, it's technically a lucky placement, but that doesn't mean you're going to use it with discernment. And this is why, again, we are quantifying what we're finding here. Now, can you see my screen here, Susan? Am I still sharing my screen?
I can see your screen, but when you go into Robin Williams' chart, I see the numbers very blurry.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know if the audience sees that too, so.
Well, that might just be because the way this is being shared.
Okay.
But I have a feeling that
But as long as you can see it, that's fine.
Fair. Okay. And I have a feeling that my audience, usually when the playback happens, you can go to a higher definition and you'll be able to see everything a little bit better. So that hasn't been an issue in the past. So now that you've mentioned it, I'm going to look back on this video and see if that's the case. Technology is a great time when it works.
Well, you know, Pluto's in Aquarius today, so.
Fair. Oh, you know what? And that's today. Oh my gosh. And Teresa, my friend Teresa, is saying that it is a little bit blurry. Can you see the letters that I'm giving on this page?
That's perfectly clear. It's only on his chart, the numbers themselves. I mean, everything else I can see perfectly fine. I can see Sun, Mars. It's all good.
Okay, and it's the little detailed
numbers.
degrees.
Yeah.
So we might just have to deal with that. So that probably means that as we go along, I'm going to have to be dimensioning the exact degrees that each planet is on. Now, in the case of Robin Williams' Mars here, he has a Scorpio rising and he has Mars at 11 degrees, 53 seconds of Cancer. It's almost at 12 degrees of Cancer. So thank you for letting me know that, Susan. We'll just have to mention that as we go along. So we know that it is important to quantify the house lord before we digest what it means to have, for example, the first lord in the 9th house. Now, chapter 8 is an important primer for discussing what's given in chapter 11. And this is the Rashi aspects, as we've said. This is also the bones of what is given in Jaimini. Now, what we see is that when a planet is in a cardinal sign, it affects the fixed signs of all the other fixed signs except for the one adjacent to it. You can see this with Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And it's the same thing with the fixed signs. For example, if you have a planet in Taurus, it is going to be aspecting all of the other cardinal signs except for the one adjacent to it, which is Aries. Now, this in particular, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's important to the prosperity of a house to know if there are any benefic aspects to that house. This is what's given in chapter 11. And we're going to talk about that when we get there. For now, it's important to know what we mean when we talk about a Rashi aspect. So if we have Venus in Scorpio, that Venus is going to be helping whatever house is assigned to Capricorn, Aries, and Cancer. In the case of Robin Williams, he's a Scorpio rising. So if he had Venus in Scorpio, that would be good for his 3rd house of Capricorn. It would be good for his 6th house of Aries. It would be good for his 9th house of Cancer. Just to give everybody an example. And then when it comes to the mutable signs, all of the mutable signs Rashi aspect each other. So I think in Robin Williams' chart, he has the moon in Pisces, I believe. Here we see the moon in Pisces and with Rahu, that's correct. So this moon and Rahu are all going to be Rashi aspecting the other mutable signs. As well, for Robin Williams' sake, it's important to note that he has Venus in Virgo. And so this Venus is technically going to be Rashi aspecting all the other mutable signs. Mind you, it is debilitated, so it can only give so much of its benefic ability there. But it does still give a bonus effect there. So we know that the mutable signs all Rashi aspect each other. This is very basic Vedic astrology stuff. These Rashi aspects exist as entirely separate science from planetary aspects. We're not talking about trines and we're not even talking about squares. Rashi aspects, I should say this, you know, we talk about the difference between, let me come back to my regular screen here. It's very important to regard the difference between what's called Rashi aspects, which is a planet giving fertility or malefic destruction to a sign. And this, we regard the signs themselves as the fertile ground, as the place where the planets, as the Bhavesha, the Bhavesha is what we call the house lord. And the Bhavesha, the house lord, can only expect to give so much prosperity based on the ground, which is the aspects being given to the sign that house lord is a dispositor for. It's very deep and involved language, but this is just the way we have to describe it. So this is why the very ground which each planet gets its strength from is the signs that it rules. And it's hard to expect that a planet can give much good if there are not good Rashi aspects. It's a whole different aspect of astrology that Western astrologers would do well to learn to understand. Western astrologers I found these frustrating when I first got into them because it was so strange to me. But as you and I talked about, Susan, I pulled back my expectations of knowledge and just rolled with it. And this is how I've come to this very important aspect of my practice. The Rashi, the sign, is the field or soil from which the potentials of the planets are nurtured. It is vital to the potential force and reserves of the planet's agenda as a house lord. So, even a planet in good dignity, by being in a friendly sign, may still experience difficulty producing the things represented by the houses it owns because of the state of the house itself. So how do we define whether a house is in a good state? Behold, this is our aspect of chapter 11, Parashara's Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. This is the prosperity versus annihilation of a house. Now, this is a sort of cosmology here that I kind of always like to give. The Lagna is us here on Earth. It's the rising sign. It's the primary karmic lens or filter for the light of the grahas. Each rising sign changes what the planet means to the person. For Scorpio rising, Mars means something very different than Mars would mean to a Virgo rising. So this is kind of just basically what this is saying. Then the Bhavesha is the house lord, and then the Rashis and Bhavas are the signs themselves. So what we're given here is that the agenda, action, and nature of every planet is painted some shade of color in the unconscious energy field of the rising sign, because that planet generally rules one or two certain auspicious or inauspicious signs from the Lagna. It's the Bhavas. The nature of a planet is painted by the function it serves the rising sign through the houses that it owns. And the example I give here is, what does it mean that Mercury rules the 5th house of Aquarius? It says something about the nature of Aquarius, but we can only know what that Mercury is like by quantifying it. Its position, its avashtas, its dignity, its shadbala, etc. So this is where the bones of this understanding of the prosperity of the houses comes from. And so now we are going to give what is given in Parashara here. Now, I'd just like to chime in with you here, Susan. Are you following me here? And is this all looking Gucci from where you're sitting? Sweet.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm hoping everybody's enjoying me going through these bones of theory here. Now, this is the meat of what is given. This is essentially chapter 11. Now, there are a few things given before this in chapter 11, and they're just more extraneous information about how to essentially interpret the houses. But it's this part in particular that gives the understanding of the prosperity or annihilation of a house. Now, again, there's a lot to go through here. And if anybody's interested in really digging into the guts of this, again, you can refer to my own channel and you can find me going through this in a very concise way. It's like an hour class that I did, and I just got it all very quick. So what we're given here is there's positive things that bring prosperity to a house lord. and that would also bring prosperity to the house. And then there's negative things. These are what we call annihilation. And I break it into a sort of a point system. So the big points that you can get is when a house is occupied by or Rashi aspected by a benefic graha. And I generally convey this as 2 points, but really we have to take this with a grain of salt because Parashara doesn't actually give this point system. This is something I've kind of devised to sort of, Suzan mentioned at the beginning that Parashara doesn't really give details on how to use or interpret a lot of the sutras that he gives. He gives the bones, and you got to make those bones into a bone stock or a soup. You can add garlic, you can add onion, you can add whatever, but he gives the bones, and you have to deal with your flavor profile of how you want to deal with those bones. So how I've given it is sort of this point system, but we have to take into account that there are subtleties. For example, I've said in my little house system that when a bhava is Rashi aspected by a benefic graha, like Venus, for example, we can generally give that up like 2 points, for example. We always have to consider that, and for example, in Robin Williams' chart, when we see Venus in the sign of Virgo, it's debilitated. And so it's not going to be able to give the full account of its bhava aspect. So I would almost, even just by virtue of this Venus being debilitated, I would almost call that a 1 point of prosperity to these other signs, including the sign that it's in. So ultimately, I've devised this little bit of a point system, and we're kind of going through all these important points. Now, the first one is, again, this is coming directly from the sutra given in Parashara here. Now, I've got this a little bit more clearly put in this presentation. So the first point is that we can predict the prosperity of a house, which is conjunct or Rashi aspected by a benefic. We see, for example, in this little example chart, we've got Jupiter in Virgo, and this Jupiter is going to be affecting Sagittarius, Pisces, and Gemini. In this case, it's doing good for the person's rising sign, which is a positive thing. So the first rule is you can predict the prosperity of a house, which is conjunct or Rashi aspected by a benefic. If we were trying to see what this person's rising sign was like as a Pisces rising, we could say that there's a great boost coming from Jupiter being in Virgo because of that Rashi aspect. And we could see Jupiter Rashi aspecting the Lagna, the rising sign there. Now, the next point given is when a house lord is in Yuva Avashta, Prabhupada Avashta, or Kumara Avashta, or close to the 10th house cusp. This brings prosperity. Now, this is a whole one that really we could already, there's a lot here. The first one is these two that are called Baladi Avashtas. It's Yuva or Kumara. The Yuva is any planet between 12 and 18 degrees. It's considered an adult. Now, Kumara, it's a young adult. And this is when a planet is in an odd sign and it's between 6 and 12 degrees. Or when it's in an even sign and it's between 24 and 18 degrees. We can really, this is a whole thing that you would have to go through. And I've kind of got it here in my little presentation. When a planet, for example, we're looking at a Leo sign, the sign of Leo. If we have Venus at 6 to 12 degrees, or Jupiter rather, it's Kumara. When we have this planet Venus, it's between 12 and 18. Any planet between 12 and 18 is always going to be Yuva. And this is going to bring that planet prosperity. You just got to dig that it's the opposite for even signs, or that's water and earth signs, like Scorpio. For Scorpio, Mars is Kumara, or, any planet is Kumara when it's between 18 and 24 degrees. And then it's Yuva, once again, when it's between 12 and 18. So this is what we read when we say that when a house lord is Yuva Avasta or Kumara Avasta, it's going to have its well-being. The house's well-being is indicated. So we've already given a lot here. The other two that give prosperity is when it's awake by being in its own sign or exalted, and when it's close to the 10th house cusp. The cusp of karma, planets are bound to be pressured into action, and therefore we get to work that planet out in our experience. So these are the main things that bring prosperity. And this is not even talking really about the annihilation of a house that can happen. But for now, I want to chime in with you, Suzan. I want to just ask you what you think about what we have given thus far in terms of the prosperity of the houses. Does it make sense that all these indications would bring prosperity to the house that a planet rules?
Of course, because a benefic wants to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I would wonder is a debilitated planet doesn't really have anything to give.
Right.
But I know what you're doing. You're giving it a 1 because then it's going to be taken away after, right? Is that what you're doing?
I would give it a 1 instead of a 2 because so far as I understand it, a benefic, even when it's debilitated in Virgo, like in the case of Robin Williams, I should say, I'm glad you brought it up, Suzan. This is one of these moments. This is why I love having people on my channel here, because Parashara doesn't actually say.
He doesn't, exactly. And I would actually add to, who am I? What kind of authority I am?
Well, this is what it's about,
But you know what? I
Go
would
right
actually add to this sutra, right? Because in the ancient times, the rishis, they didn't want to be bothered with any of this stuff, right? They just wanted to give you the bare minimum, and then they wanted you to do the work to kind of like expand on it, right?
And explore. Yeah.
Exactly. So he only gives awake, and he only gives Yuva and Kumara, right? Because that's the Yuva gives full, right? 100%. And the Kumara only gives 50% of its power, right?
You got it.
So I would add to that the Bala might be able to give something too. I think it's 25%, right? If it's being helped by someone else, right?
A benefic in a bhava?
If it's being helped by a benefic or by someone with a good avashta.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to kind of like take it all in and then make that judgment.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I like to use something of a point system. Right. But this is something that ultimately, as time goes on, people are going to see like a lesson like what you and I are doing right now. And hopefully, I mean, gosh, like 100 years from now, somebody could take this and run with it and make like a 50-point system. Yeah, that's very specific, but for now we just have to deal with what we can.
Yeah.
So that being said, I agree that, I think thankfully Robin Williams's chart, what we're looking at is something of a good example of the kind of quantifications we would want to make here. So let's say, for example, this Venus is at 10 degrees. It's 10 degrees 11 of the sign of Virgo. So this Venus, because it's in an earth sign, it would be at 10 degrees. This would be considered not Kumara. This would be Vrida. And it's debilitated. And it's with Ketu and Saturn. And it doesn't have any Rashi aspects coming from other benefics. It's got a Rashi aspect coming from the moon in Pisces. But this moon, I think I would consider it to be a malefic. Because it's waning. You're correct. It's a waning moon. So it doesn't have any benefic energy to give. So based on this, Suzan, how would you, I guess I'll say mine first. I would interpret that this Venus being in Virgo, I do like to stick to generally what is given in Parashara. Ernst has kind of told me before, for example, like I've brought something like this up to him, and he said ultimately Venus being in the bhava is going to be Rashi aspecting. I shouldn't quote him like this, but I should just say that this is my own thing because I don't want to misquote Ernst. But as I understand it, Venus in Virgo, even if it's Vrida, even if it's debilitated, this is still a benefic in a mutable sign. And so it will be giving some positive qualities to the other mutable signs. But I think it would be a good idea to really say that it doesn't have much going for how much it can give to those mutable signs.
Right.
Right.
And then you have to kind of think about what those signs mean, right? The 2nd, the 5th, right? The 8th.
Totally.
The thing is that it can probably, because he doesn't say at all if it can give, if it's debilitated. A benefic being debilitated can give or not, right?
Right.
So I think for that, we just have to do testing.
Yep. Beautiful.
I actually don't know much about his life except for, what happened to him with his death. But he was a great actor. He made a lot of people happy. He entertains a lot of people. And yet he suffered so much, right? So that Venus really hurt him.
Yeah. And it's in his 11th house. It'd be really, it'd be interesting for us to try and conceive of what is exactly going on with him to give him what he's got going on here. I would say that ultimately he has Rahu and Ketu in this mutable axis of, Ketu in Virgo and Rahu in Pisces in the 5th house. It'd be interesting to think of the fact that, he probably had a desire to express that 5th house creative energy with Rahu being there. And we would really want to look to his Jupiter and see how it's doing in order to see how Rahu's doing. But we can quantify, what's happening with Jupiter through the prosperity of the houses. And what we can see is that he has at least the one prosperous Venus going for, not necessarily prosperous, but he has benefic Venus going towards the 11th and the 5th. And this does say something about creativity. It says something about his ability to be a creative person. Venus being here, I think, gives him the ability to play through what is expressed here. Robin Williams was a great actor and a great comedian. And he did, having Venus in the 11th house here, he did get well known. But having Ketu with Saturn here in Virgo in the 11th shows that despite the fact that Venus could, again, this is like Venus being here in the 11th. It's like he was given $10,000, but the highly malefic influences on this axis took that money, took that fortune of his skill, and might have run him roughshod with it. And that Venus here doesn't really have enough prosperity to give him the most joyful experience of what he's given in the 5th and 11th house, because he ended up taking his life. So maybe, I guess we don't want to, that's me very much just speaking to what I'm seeing in this moment. But, I don't want to say that Robin Williams committed suicide because of just strictly this angle alone. There'd be a lot for us to look up there. But hopefully what I'm saying speaks a little bit to the specifics that we're talking about in this particular part.
Right. And we have to remember that even though Venus may be able to give a little bit to those things that it's aspecting and it still doesn't have any power to help her houses or his houses, right? 7th and 12th. So those houses kind of get destroyed when Venus comes. Venus time period, Mahadasha, Antardasha.
Fair. Yeah. Especially because that Venus is with Ketu. It's with Saturn. It's bound to be
completely starved,
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Yeah. And it has no strength in itself to help out what is, really happening there in any really quantifiable way. I think that this Venus probably is doing a little bit to help the situation, but it's getting starved and damaged way more than it's able to help, which is something very interesting to consider in the case of Robin Williams. Somebody who was in the limelight smiling all the time, but he probably had a long dark shadow when he was outside of the camera lens in the limelight. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's lots that we could really sort of roll here in terms of just talking about prosperity. Something we can speak to is the fact that this Jupiter is in the sign of Aries, and this Jupiter is Rashi aspecting Scorpio, the rising sign. It's Rashi aspecting Aquarius, which is interesting, the 4th sign, and it's Rashi aspecting Leo, the 10th house, and the 10th house cusp. Really, he's got Pluto there in Leo, and as well as Mercury. Mercury does well in Leo. So we see Jupiter, Rashi aspecting the 10th house, and that is going to give a little bit of positive prosperity to the sun and to the 10th house as well. So that is something that we could speak to. But what we would want to look at next is the possible annihilation that the sun is experiencing. And this sun is experiencing a little bit of an annihilation. It's mainly because it's with a malefic, and it's also with Mars. Mars is a malefic, and as well, Mars is considered to be the evil 6th house lord. And these are 2 points that we see.
I think that according to this chapter, Parashara says that Mars is the most malefic. So we have to take that into consideration too. Like, I think that in some chapter in BPHS, it says this is the best and this is the worst.
Yeah.
Like it quantifies them.
Yep, you're right. And Mars is more malefic than Saturn.
Exactly. And people don't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel bad for Saturn, you know?
Yeah, everyone kind of points the finger at Saturn as being this heavy thing. And it is, but Mars really, with its fiery, raging energy, can cause
much more worse.
More malefic damage.
Yeah,
sure.
Explosions, you know, accidents. I mean, it's bad. Saturn can actually give you a lot of good. It just makes you work for it, you know?
That's right. And usually
they both do, to be fair, they both do. They just make you work really hard to get that, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And I think really Mars can be the most painful because there's a victimization with Saturn that gives the space for self-forgiveness. It's like usually with Saturn, circumstances have caused you to experience limits. With Mars, you've shot yourself in the foot. And you're fucking pissed that you did something. So self-forgiveness is very important with any heavy things with regard to Mars.
Plus, it's going to happen so unexpectedly too.
Right. Yeah, it kind of rends things in this quick way, whereas Saturn is more of a slow boil, the boiled frog thing. So, you know, for all those watching, I think it might be good for us to take a quick eye to the annihilation aspects. And I am just noticing, Susan, that it is, we're coming past 1 o'clock now. So what do you think about us quickly looking at the annihilation points? Then we can speak to it a little bit, and we'll kind of see if we even want to poke around at Robin Williams's chart a little bit more. What do you think about that? Does that feel like a good flow?
Absolutely. One thing also, Mercury would be a benefic. So Mercury would be helping the houses it's in and aspecting.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And Mercury is given in Jaimini as being one of the, what is it you said?
Jupiter and Mercury, they manifest.
You got it. It's a manifester. Yes, I agree. So Mercury kind of has a mutable, benefic nature, meaning if it's close to a malefic, it tends to take on the quality of a malefic in that sense. But Mercury and Jupiter are always positive manifestors in this way. They will help by Rashi aspect as well as by the house they occupy. They tend to help somebody manifest what is given in the house that it's occupying and aspecting. In this case, it's this Plutonian 10th house for Robin Williams. So that is a good point. And interestingly, Parashara, this is something I've always been intrigued by, because Parashara basically says prosperity, which is different. What we're seeing in chapter 11 of Parashara is different from the manifestation quality that Jaimini talks about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be interested to, this is something I've always diced around with, and it's something I really got to talk to Ernst Wilhelm about, because he, God bless him, he gives me the space to answer so much. But if you were to have a lone Mercury in a house, I think that if it's not associated with any malefics, it's generally conveyed as a natural benefic.
Yeah.
But is that how you would interpret it as well?
Absolutely. Mercury wants to help.
Yes. Cool.
Like, and even if it's with a malefic very close by, it still won't hurt that much, right?
Right.
So it would become a malefic. So it would take on those qualities. However, it wouldn't hurt that much because it naturally wants to help.
And it's still expanding.
With healing too. Mercury is a healer.
Right.
You have to have a certain combination for it to be like a doctor or a healer in Jaimini. So it's a healer,
Cool.
Just
beautiful.
Like this is the nurse.
Wonderful, Susan. I'm glad that you can add that in, because that even is clarifying for me. I completely agree with you on what you're saying. I almost read it as like, the sun is such an important arbiter of selfhood in the chart, and it has to bring a bit of a malefic quality, because we got to dig into whatever is going on in order to manifest things. Mercury, in the sense, even when it has associations with a malefic, the malefic energy that it's doing is ultimately self-manifestation.
Right.
Painful as that might be.
And we don't do the outer planets for this judgment either. So
correct. Yeah, so very good, Susan.
I want to make sure that your audience knows, and my audience knows, that we can't mix the outer planets with what we're doing now.
Right. Because the outer planets are their own thing. They're not necessarily benefic or malefic. I consider them as being amplifiers of a certain very particular sort for whatever is given in the house. And I would say that, like the 10th house, by having in Robin Williams's chart, the 10th house having Pluto in there can have a Plutonian amplification of what is regarded through that 10th house.
Absolutely.
And it's a for better or worse thing. In the case of Robin Williams, it's interesting that he's got Mercury in Leo, and Jupiter is Rashi aspecting this Leo where Pluto is. So this Plutonian 10th house has to do with his skill, his career, what he's doing in the world, and it's got Pluto there. So I'm glad that we mentioned it, because I'm somebody who does employ the outer planets, but I think you're right to make the point that the outer planets are, I always say, they're not arbiters of the chakra fields of the Rashis, like the first 7 planets are.
Right. And they're a higher consciousness. They're part of our higher consciousness.
Right.
In fact, I would say that they're Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Cool. Right? That's something that we got to talk about one time,
Pluto
Susan.
Would be Shiva, that Shiva energy of transformation, destruction, letting everything clear out so you can rebuild something new, right?
Absolutely. And if Shiva, being Pluto, is well supported in the chart, there's a destructive energy that could have positive spiritual significance to a person.
Absolutely.
And I think that this seems to be, in my opinion, to be the case with Robin Williams. But again, we've seen that there are aspects to the 10th house of Leo, but it's important for us now to also consider that there are negative, destructive, deleterious effects coming from the sun. And it's mostly because of its association with Mars. Mars is a malefic, and Mars as the 6th house lord. So let's quantify this a little bit, as probably one of the last things that we'll say in this video. When we look at the annihilation points, what we read is that when a bhava is not aspect by its own lord, and when the lord of a bhava is with a malefic planet, or it's one of the houses of one of the lords of evil. It's the 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th, and 12th, as well as when it's defeated in planetary war. And it also has, if it's in one of these 3 avashtas, that's Vriddhavashta, Mritavashta, and Suptavashta. Suptavashta means sleeping, so that's like enemy, dignity, or debilitation. Vriddha and Mrita are the worst of these, as I've already described them, as these Baladi avashtas. So when it comes to a odd sign, Vriddha is the latter end. It's from 18 to 30 degrees of an odd sign like Leo. And it's the opposite for the even signs. It's from 0 to 12 degrees of an even sign. This is considered Mrita and Vriddha avashta, and this causes annihilation of the house lord. Of course, we have to consider all of these together. So ultimately, what's given in Parashara, we see when a bhava is not aspected by its own lord, when its lord is with a malefic planet like Mars, when its lord is with one of the lords of evil, it's the 3rd, the 6th, the 11th, the 3rd, the 6th, the 8th, the 11th, and the 12th lord, when it's defeated in planetary war, or when it's in one of these 3 avashtas, that's Vriddha, Mrita, and then when it's Suptavashta, when it's sleeping. These are what is conveyed when we talk about the annihilation of the planets. And I've probably got a slide somewhere here that conveys them all, but it's not here with me at the moment.
Oh, and you're not sharing right now.
Oh, no way. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate you for that. So this is basically it. I've just said it all. If anybody wants to pause this, you can kind of read what I've gone through. Bhava not aspected by its lord, it's with a malefic planet or an evil house lord, planetary war, or when it's Vriddha, Mrita, and Supta avashta. So these are the annihilation points that Parashara gives us. And to use the example of Robin Williams, I think it's useful to use his 10th house of Leo because it's got Pluto there. So Pluto is going to amplify the significations of all things related to Leo in the 10th house, especially because the 10th house cusp is there. Now, the sun is actually, I believe, if I'm going to find out where his Chalita cusps are, his 10th house cusp is at 8 degrees Leo. So that's not that close to the sun. So I wouldn't say the sun is getting helped by being close to the 10th house. Because as we said, when a planet is, what we read is that it's in the 10th house, but what is generally given is that this is referring to being close to the 10th house cusp. In this particular sutra, at least that's what this commentator on Parashara gives. And that's what I also heard from Ryan's course as well. So I have to give these caveats because they're there. So what we see with Leo, we have Mercury in Leo and we have Jupiter aspecting Leo. These are positive manifestation points that are helping out the sign of Leo. And that is as well, so this gives prosperity to Robin Williams' 10th house and to all the things falling into this 10th house. Now, what we have to also consider is the sun. Where is the sun, and does it have any of the annihilation qualities we've discussed? Now, the first thing we'll say is that the sun is at 28 degrees of Cancer. Since Cancer is, I'm checking that we can see me now. Good. Now I have to check all the time. We know that Cancer is an even sign. So being at 28 degrees of Cancer, this is Bala Avashta, and this is not Mrita or Vriddha. So I call this neutral. If it was in Yuva or Kamara, it would have prosperity. If it was in Mrita or Vriddha, it would be annihilation. When it's in Bala, it's neutral. So that doesn't give any annihilation to the sun, but it is associated with malefic Mars, which, as we read, will bring annihilation, is with a malefic planet, and is also with the evil 6th house lord, Mars. This is, what are the word? It's compounding. It's a compounding effect. So the sun being with malefic Mars, Mars also being the lord of the evil 6th house, does bring this sun a little bit of annihilation. Now, ultimately, in my opinion, I would say that while the sun is with this malefic Mars, Mars is debilitated in Cancer, which means this Mars can't give that much annihilation to the sun. Even although the malefic quality of Mars is still there, I think in general, we have to interpret this with a little bit of, again, we got to take it with a grain of salt. In my opinion, the prosperity coming from Jupiter in Aries and Mercury in Leo, Mercury being in its friend sign, those prosperity marks are doing more for the sign of Leo than the annihilation caused by this debilitated Mars, who is also the 6th lord. So this is almost like the 10th house here has to experience a little bit of annihilation, but I'd say it's probably more prosperous. What would you say about that, Susan?
I would say the 10th house is actually very prosperous. I mean, we can see it with his work, right? Like
Totally.
He's famous, right? He had fame, he had name.
And he was very skillful.
He was very successful. So the 10th house was not the problem. The problem was his first house, his 12th house, I believe, right?
Yeah, that would be Libra.
His 6th house even.
Yeah. So what you're saying is
but the good part is that Mars is aspecting the first, right? So
totally.
So we can see how he had a nice path until he didn't, right? And it was very abrupt.
Yeah, and it goes to show you this is why the dashas are important, because you can have paths lined up. And he obviously did, when he was a big deal, all of the positive prosperity written things in his chart allowed him to climb to the top. He was so skillful in his work, and his work was very comedic and mercurial, having Mercury as the 8th and the 11th lord in that 10th house, not, Mercury could be a very potentially bad planet for Scorpio rising, but this Mercury isn't with any other planets. So the evil house lord of the 11th and 8th house is not damaging anything. It's here in the 10th house, which I would say that doesn't damage the 10th house.
Well, I think that he would, for Mercury being in the 10th house, being the lord of the 11th and the 8th house, his actions were driving him to do things based on his desires and based on liberation. The 8th house is moksha.
Right. For sure.
What's the final moksha, right? Not being here.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
He got liberated from his pain because he was in a lot of pain, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting, for us to sort of correlate where exactly that pain would be coming from. Right. I think in a lot of ways, it's probably K2 with Saturn in the 11th house. Yeah. Yeah. And it's starving that debilitated Venus there. There's a lot there that this poor soul is having to deal with. And really, Mercury is channeling these 3 planets in that 10th house in his career. Like his career is so hot, revved up, and it's got that Pluto there, that he did have a lot going on in his career. And the background of this tough stuff going on in his 11th house had to be permeated and entangled with and engaged with what he was doing in his career and his skill.
Right.
So it's very interesting to read these and regard these in this way. Now, ultimately,
I think that's really how we're supposed to do it. We have to take it all into account,
Beautiful. Totally, Susan. I totally agree with you. And cool. So we really dug into some good stuff here with regards to this particular lesson that we were going through here. Now, do you have any other thoughts that we could bring into from where we are right now, Susan?
About his chart specifically or something else?
I guess in terms of, since we are here today to discuss the prosperity of the houses, I guess I should say that I'm glad that I went through this with you to discuss the specific example of Robin Williams, because it really showed the prosperity of that 10th house, having a little bit of damage to it, but not really being enough to take out his career. His career did fine, but there are other things going on in his chart that we could look through and quantify. It'd be interesting even to talk about like his fourth house lord, his, the various things that we might have thought might have given Robin Williams the hard time. And maybe we could do that eventually.
Yeah.
But for now, it was good as an example for us to talk about the annihilation and prosperity of the houses as given by Parashara.
Yeah, I think it was a good example because we know that he was really good at his career.
Totally.
He was a famous actor, famous comedian. So having that Mercury there totally helped him,
Beautiful.
manifest that stuff. And having that Jupiter also Rashi aspecting did that too. I think that the most problematic was the dual signs,
Yeah, seems like it.
Saturn, K2, Venus, and then you have the moon and Rahu.
Right.
In my opinion, I don't know about you, but whenever I see Rahu and the moon together,
yeah,
I'm very cautious about what's going on with their minds.
Totally.
Even K2, but I think the Rahu is probably worse with the moon, depending on if anything else is helping it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in his case, there was nothing helping that moon.
And yeah, you're right. Like this moon and Rahu are together in the mutable sign of Pisces, where we know this kind of difficult situation is sort of happening. So the moon and Rahu can deal, but when it is, if it has prosperity, if there are markers of prosperity to help out, especially the moon, it'd be interesting to even look up what's going on with the sign of Cancer. But as we can see, there are no benefics going towards Cancer. We have the Sun and Mars there in Cancer. And the moon itself only has this very weak Venus as I shouldn't say the moon, but the sign of Pisces has this weak Venus as the only prosperity going towards it. The dispositor of Pisces, being Jupiter, is there in the 6th house, and that's going to be agitated by the 6th house. So this moon and Rahu are standing on a tricky precipice, and there's not much there to help support what we know as being a difficult position of the moon being that close to Rahu. Right?
It's a very, very sad situation.
Yeah.
He was basically a chameleon. So we could see with the 5th, 11th axis that he just was totally open, but he never felt seen or appreciated. That was his internal feeling, right? He didn't have that connection with anyone, right?
Right.
Well, I don't know. I can't say because I don't know his personal life.
Yeah. I'm with you.
But based on what ended up happening, like he just felt really out of place in these social situations.
And you know what's funny is that I think that really something that's coming to my mind right now, Susan, just while we're here, this is kind of going around our topic, but I think it's worth pointing out that Robin Williams, being a Scorpio rising, as we see here, Venus, because he's got Neptune in Libra in the 12th house. So his 12th house is probably very sensitized, which means we would hope whatever's going on with Venus would be well situated in order to help him have an existential cushioning with this Neptune in the 12th. But guess what? What we see is Venus, it's being ashamed by Saturn. This is something I'm just kind of cognizing now because whenever
the moon.
What's that?
So is the moon, right?
The moon, oh yeah, I guess it's technically ashamed just by being with Rahu and Pisces.
In the 5th. In the
5th. Now I see. You're right. Thank you, Susan. Way to keep your eye on things. You're right. The moon being with Rahu in the 5th is being ashamed. So we have both of the feminine planets in this person's chart being ashamed. And the feminine planet Venus rules the 12th house and is being really shunned by being ashamed, by being associated with Saturn and K2 in that malefic 11th house.
Right. And then the 7th also. The
7th Lord, I would say that too.
The 7th is only getting beat up by Sun and Mars, right?
Yeah.
So it's just not a good situation for that 7th. And the 7th is the other or the public, right?
Right.
It's just not a good situation for him. He just never felt comfortable in public situations, which we
Wow.
wouldn't understand based on that, 10, based on
Right.
his fame and his, his status in the world when he was alive.
It's amazing. What we really see with him is this Plutonian Mercurially supported 10th house, someone who's very willing and just is incredible with how he expresses himself. But what we see is probably his personal life probably had a lot of struggles, his intimacy with other people, even the intimacy that he might have had with other actors on set. He probably got through it as best as he could just to keep doing the creative thing that his Rahu in the 5th desired. And he leaned really on his 10th house to do all this, but there was probably a lot of shadow beneath what was seen really through that Plutonian 10th house. It's a perfect example of what often happens in astrology. When, something must have happened to him, either in a Mercury or a Sun dasha, that brought him to the level of fame that he got to. And then somewhere along the line, the curtain moved and revealed the shadow of what was going on behind him, and it was enough for him to take his life.
Yes. And you know what? It happened exactly when he went into the period of the 2 debilitated planets in his chart.
No kidding.
Exactly to the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
No kidding.
And I think that's what Vedic astrology stands out, because of the timing system.
Right.
The dashas, and then
Beautiful.
you have so many other dashas that you can corroborate. What's that word?
Corroborate?
Yes.
Something like that.
Yeah, because you want to get more saying the same thing. You want to get
Right.
more things, more facts saying the same thing.
Yeah, because that's when everything lines up. There is a word that you're thinking of, and I use it all the time. What is that word? Oh, I want to have it now because it's such an important word.
Corroborate. I think it's corroborate.
Yeah.
It's not collaborate, it's corroborate.
Corroborate. Right? Yeah, corroborate does work.
Yeah.
I used to use another word. It's when a whole bunch of things come together.
Confluence.
Confluence is it. Yeah, nailed it. Nailed it. Good one, Susan.
Yes.
You're great, Susan. I really enjoyed doing this with you.
Yeah, this was so much fun.
Yeah, so, Susan, I loved having you on here. I loved shooting the shit with you. I really enjoyed doing this. Now, this was a great first session for us. And I hope our audience knows that me and Susan just emailed each other and we're just like, yeah, let's do the thing that we do. Let's just do it. And we're going to do astrology. And this is our first time doing it. And I think that you are a great collaborator to have here on my channel with me, Susan.
Thank you. I think you are the same.
I'm so glad to hear that. So, there's plenty of time, we're both young people. There's so many things for us to unfold and talk about in the world of astrology. Now that you and I have gotten a flow for each other, I think that it'll be easier for us to think about things that we could want to talk about. And so, Susan, my friend, I'm always going to be in touch for you. If you want to talk about anything in the future, as time goes on this year, I'm going to be getting into doing more charts soon, but I've been focusing on doing astrology on YouTube for the last little bit.
Well, I think that's smart.
Yeah, I think they're both good because I love actually just doing the thing. So I tend to weave through, but there will be a point when either if you want to email me or I'll email you, there's lots for us to talk about. Now, for those watching in our audience, you just got a taste of what me and Susan are all about. You can see that we're both very much in a similar pocket. What do you want us to talk about? Should we talk about nakshatras? Should we talk about cross-interpreting Rashis with nakshatras? Should we talk about more Parashara stuff? Should I invite Susan on to talk about Jaimini and all the techniques that are given there? Let us know if you have any thoughts and ideas in the comments, if you feel like it, whether now or after the video is done. And stay in touch with us because I really enjoyed doing this and I'd love to have you on my show again, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Truly my pleasure. Now, for everybody who's interested, again, if you've enjoyed this conversation with Susan, you can find Susan on her own website. That's sacredconnections8.com. I believe I've got that correct, Susan?
Yes.
And also, now you have your own YouTube channel as well, Susan. What would people look up to find that?
Just my name, SUZAN
SMADI. And so that's what your YouTube channel is. Is that is that actually your last name?
That is actually my last name.
Wow, you are made for Samadhi.
I
Written
think
in
so
your name.
too. Hopefully for Smadi.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's all we could pray for.
Yes.
Well, bless, my friend. My friend Teresa here is chiming in and saying thank you very much for us doing this as well. For all the folks who always hang out with us, my friend Teresa, we had let's see, who do we have? Gen X Jason, Black Panther, Rob Beamer. I appreciate you all, and I appreciate you, Susan. Susan. It's been a real nice time, and we'll all stay in touch for everything, okay? Maybe I'll say bye to you, Susan. I'll end the live stream, and then you and I could say bye. What do you think of that?
Absolutely.
Sweet.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you guys again soon. Sweet.